Hey YouTube, Kevin Cleary here with a knife video. Today, we're going to have a bit of a discussion video, and this is going to be based on viewer questions. I'm very close to 5,000 subscribers. In fact, we may be there already by the time you're watching this. And so that's pretty exciting. And when I was thinking, how do I want to sort of commemorate this? What do I want to do for that 5,000 subscriber video? I decided I would do a question and answer type of video. Now, I'd love to be able to do that live, but the reality is where I live, that doesn't really work very well. I've done it once before, but I have to actually go to someone else's house and do it, and that's not really a great setup. So anyway, this is how we're doing it. I've been collecting questions and comments and things like that over the last little while, getting ready to do this video. And then in addition to that, I also went ahead and posted on Instagram as well as on the Sharp Stuff Facebook group. And if you're not on that Facebook group, I'll put a link in the description box so you can go check it out. And I asked there, hey guys, I'm going to do this video and I'm going to answer some questions. Is there anything you'd like me to address? And so I got a fair bit of feedback there. And so there's a lot of stuff to cover here. I don't know if we're going to get through it all, but I do have the coffee here so that if my voice kind of breaks down, at least I've got a warm drink to keep me going. I would recommend you also grab yourself a coffee. If you can get a Tim Hortons coffee, that's awesome. If not, just know that you're in my prayers. Tim Hortons definitely has some really awesome coffee, and it's one of the things I always miss when I'm traveling down in the good old US of A, that it's hard to find a good cup of coffee. And don't even mention Starbucks, because as far as I'm concerned, that does not qualify as a good cup of coffee in any sense. So moving on, now that I've sort of dissed everyone who's drinking Starbucks coffee, hopefully there's not too many of you, let's go ahead and get to some of those questions, all right? And I've got a bunch here, and as I say, I hope you find this interesting. I'd love to see down below, you weigh in on some of these issues yourself. They're questions, so by their very nature, they elicit a response. So if you want to follow up with my response, I would be more than glad to see you do that. And I will have a couple of specific things I want to ask you about as we kind of go through the different questions that we're going to touch on. And I've counted about 10, 11, 12, man, there's like 15 questions here. So I'm going to try to move pretty quickly and spend a little, some of them are going to take a little more time, but I'm going to do my best to move this along. But this is probably going to be a little longer video. The first one is, and probably the most asked question is, do you have a favorite or favorites knives? All right, is there one knife or maybe a top 5 knives that you just think are better than all the others, that you like more than anything else? And the answer to that is very simply no. Okay, I don't really have a favorite knife, but I probably have what I would call a type. Okay, I tend to be drawn to knives that are a little larger, that are a little bit overbuilt, that are kind of heavy duty, that have thicker blade stock, and knives that just, so all of these knives are knives that just really connect with me and that I absolutely enjoy. And I know that all of these are pretty big, hefty knives, but these are some knives that just bring me a lot of joy, and certainly the ones that I'm most drawn to naturally. Now, there are knives that break this mold. Okay, something like this I find to be absolutely amazing, the best knife that we does as far as I'm concerned. And this doesn't really fit this mold so much. I guess the overall size does, but it's not the same in terms of, its kind of philosophy of use, but I still love it. And so I do break my own rule quite often, but I can definitely identify sort of a theme here, right? These are some of the knives that I really love, and look at, they're all big and hefty and crazy, okay? So that's the answer to that. I don't really have a favorite knife per se, but I probably have a type, okay? So a knife that I'm maybe a little more drawn to than others. Next question is, and this one probably comes from a lot of Canadian viewers, why do you buy knives in the US? Don't you want to support Canadian retailers? And the answer to that is yes, I do. But the reality is I'm on a budget, and so I've got to go where I can get the knife I want for the cheapest possible price. Now, whenever I say that, I always have someone comment, well, what about the exchange? Yeah, there is an exchange rate. And so, yeah, because the Canadian dollar is worth a little less than the US dollar. And that, by the way, is that gap is closing. So that's it's a really good time if you're Canadian to buy knives from the US right now, because I think our dollar is worth about 80 some cents. Anyway, even accounting for the exchange, some knives from the US retailers are often, 20 to 40% cheaper, and that's after accounting for the exchange. So it makes sense to buy them from there. Now that's one reason. The other reason is a lot of knives that I want and like are not available in Canada. So I couldn't buy them in Canada if I wanted to. And I know that the big barrier here is the border. And, with a knife like this, by the way, this knife came from Dave Curtis in like 4 days. Okay, so crossed the border and everything very quickly, no issues at all. I've got to say, I was really impressed with the shipping. But is there a little bit of stress that you could lose a knife like this, or have it at least confiscated? You won't really lose it. You can still make other arrangements. But yeah, there's a little bit of stress with that. But I figure I'm willing to put up with a little bit of stress to save that extra bit of money. Okay, and sometimes it's a substantial amount of money. Certainly, it would be with this guy. All right, so let's carry on and go to now these questions come all the time. What is the best lock? What is the best blade steel? What is the best knife company? And people really want me to sort of take a side. And the reality is that you can't really identify a best in a lot of these categories, okay? You can have a well-done liner lock or a well-done frame lock or piston lock or back lock or compression lock or hawk lock, okay? You can have a well-done lock in all kinds of variations, and you can have a crappy lock, okay, in all kinds of variations. Some of them tend to be more problematic than others. Okay, so button locks from anything other than really high-end knives I tend to avoid, because button locks are really hard to get right, and almost every budget knife I've touched that had a button lock had some blade play issues. But that doesn't mean all button locks are bad. Okay, it just means your tolerances have to be really tight, and you've got to get everything right in order to do them well, and that's a challenge when you're trying to make a knife for $25. Okay, so I think all locks are good. All locks can definitely do the job. Is a lock like this going to be stronger than the other locks here on the table? Well, sure it is. But do I need that extra strength? Am I really at risk of cutting my fingers off every time I open my knife? No, not at all. Okay, so while I would readily admit that some locks are going to be mechanically stronger than others, and some lock geometries are going to be superior to others, there's no doubt about that. But does it really matter for the way that you should be using a folding knife? No, not really. Okay, number 4, do you use your knives? I think people watch videos like this and they see these knives here in great condition, and they go, what, do you even use those things? Like, they look pristine. Now, number 1, they're not entirely pristine. I think I can show you here. Whoops, there you go. Let's get that to focus. Okay, there's a little bit of very light rust that I'll clean off later. And actually there's some gunk on there from opening a yogurt container, okay? So yeah, I take pretty good care of my knives, but I do use them, of course I do. And here's how I'm gonna share this. Number 1, I've been doing this for a little while, and I generally know how to avoid damaging my knives. I've kind of learned some lessons over time. Number 2, I have a large rotation. Okay, so consider, if I'm carrying 10 knives, right? Just think about how often that means I'm carrying, so at the most, like once every 10 days I'm carrying this knife. Well, that means the wear and tear that knife is going to see is much less than the person who has one knife and carries it every day, day in and day out, never takes it out of his pocket, right? And so by the nature of having a YouTube channel and being a collector and having the carry habits that I do, yeah, it tends to keep my knives in a little better condition. And number 3, there are some knives that I treat a little better than others, all right? I had coffee last week with a friend of mine who's really into classic cars. Well, guess what? Saying coffee reminded me that I needed to take a sip. So guess what? We were talking about the fact that he takes really good care of those cars. He keeps them in a garage all the time. He doesn't have them in the winter, doesn't drive them in the rain. And so does he, do you drive your cars? Well, yes, I do, but I take care. And okay, so do I use my knives? Absolutely, but I do take care. I pay a little bit of attention of how I'm using them, when I'm using them, what I'm using them for. And that's true of some more so than others. All right. Now, Here's another question. By the way, I get this all the time on both ends of the scale, so it's interesting to see the dynamic, and I've yet to see a discussion between you guys, so I'd love to hear this. But if I review a really budget-friendly knife, and I say, hey, this knife is 25 bucks, so you got to adjust your expectations, people will almost always in the comments come in and say, you know, what are you doing wasting your money on a $25 knife? You should just spend $50 or $100 and get something good. And then if I review the $100 or $150 or, you know, anything in this price range, which is, by the way, this is a Curtis F3, a Brian Ty and Friends TIE Fighter, and a Hinder XM18. But if I review something like this, then I get the opposite. What? I would never spend that much money on a knife. And even something like this, you know, Recon 1 is like, I don't know, between $80 and $100. And I'll even get people commenting that this knife is more than they want to spend. So it doesn't matter which end of the spectrum I'm on, you're always going to get some people who don't like that sort of price range. They're in a different price range. And that's fine, to each his own. What I would say about this is, number one, with the channel, I try to have some balance. So I try to make sure I've got some budget knives coming in that just about anyone could afford. And number two, I do believe there's some value in saving up, spending a little more, and getting something really good that you really, really love. Now, I would never recommend that most of my viewers go out and buy something like this. But something like this, I'm going to bring the Recon 1 back in here. Yeah, this I would say it's worth the, you know, $80 to $100 that it costs, and you're getting real tangible benefits out of this over, you know, something for $50. All right, so that's what I'm going to say. It's just say to each his own, and of course there are going to be people who are comfortable in lots of different price ranges. Let's see. Oh yeah, why did you sell? This one comes up. You know, I get people commenting or sending me a message, and they'll say, you know, I have this knife and I got it from watching one of your videos and I absolutely love it. It's the best knife that's ever been made. And I say, hey, I'm so glad that you love it. But then they say, wait a second, I noticed you sold it. I saw it in a for sale video, or I saw, you know, you mentioned it in passing one time, and I was disappointed. And what I have to say about that is, don't be disappointed. All right, just because I sold something does not mean I don't like it. If something real happens, okay, where you know, I've done the review and it was a good review and I'm happy with the knife, but then a week later it develops some issue, I'm gonna make a video and tell you guys, right? I'm gonna mention, hey, you know, this knife was fine until I tried to do this with it, or you know, all of a sudden for no reason something happened to it, and you know, the warranty wasn't good, and you know, I'm gonna make a video about that. So you know, unless I say, hey, I used to love this knife and I had to change my mind because of some issue, I still love it, okay? And so, you know, recently I've had questions about the Crooked River and the Code 4, and both of those are amazing knives, and I would buy another one. In fact, I likely will buy another one of each of those, along with a few other knives that I've sold in the past. But I will tell you this, usually a knife like that I really love, I've sold it because, you know, I'm trying to finance something that's maybe difficult to find or in limited quantities, and I know that I can get that other knife, the one that I'm selling, back in the collection fairly easily whenever I want to, or whenever I'm financially able to. All right. Number 7. Okay, here's one that I get quite often, and that is, there are books behind me in the videos, and some of you, you know, who have a good high definition screen can read the back of those, and you say, hey, those are Christian books, what's the deal? Well, I'm a minister and I'm a religious person. Okay, so really that's about the end of that story. From time to time it'll come up in a video like this one, but that's pretty rare. All right. And so all I would say is, you know, you're going to be fine. If you accidentally read the back of a book that says something about God, it's not going to kill you. Just keep watching. I'm probably not talking specifically about that anyway. And so, you know, I don't care what your views are. I don't say, hey, you have to agree with me religiously or philosophically to watch my videos. And I would hope that viewers would be mature enough to say, oh, he can talk about knives even though we may differ politically or religiously or some other way. All right, and I'm sure many of us probably do. Number 8. A little bit about knife reviewers in general, and certainly myself specifically. I get a few comments from time to time, you know, related to, you know, well, most of us don't have the money that you knife reviewers have, you know, because no companies are paying us to make videos and no one's giving us free stuff. And guess what? You know, me neither. Okay, no one is giving me free stuff either. That's why I had to sell some of those knives that you guys have asked me about selling. And that's why I can't just have every single knife that comes out. And let me tell you, the reality is that in order to be making any kind of money on YouTube, and this applies to, you know, not just this channel, but pretty well all YouTube channels, the only way to make any kind of decent money is to be getting like millions upon millions of views, okay? Like hundreds of thousands per every video. And most of the time, the people who are doing that are making ridiculous toy videos, or they're dressing up in Batman and Elsa costumes running around like fools. And so because, you know, so those guys can get a ton of views and therefore make decent money from YouTube. But for the rest of us, you know, even guys in the gear community who have, you know, 20 or 50,000 subscribers, you know, those guys are not, this cannot be a full-time job, okay, for the vast majority of people. And furthermore, most companies are not giving us free stuff. I'm very fortunate that there's a Rake Knives Canada division, and because of that, I mean Rake Knives Canada, and so Matt from over there helps me out once in a while. And there are some programs, I think Boker, I've never used it, but I've been told that Boker has a program for reviewers. So if you want to review their knife, you can buy it at a lesser cost. And if you return it back to them, you can, you know, they'll give you your money back type of thing, but you don't get to keep it. Okay, so there are not knife reviewers out there that are making a living doing this. Even the guys who are quite big would be making a very modest amount of money if they were making any at all. Most of us are losing money to do this because we just enjoy doing it. All right. Along those lines, I will say, if you'd like to help me out a little bit, if you enjoy the content, if you'd like to see some more reviews, and especially if you'd like to have me to have the freedom to review stuff that maybe I don't want for my collection, but feel like you would enjoy it. And by the way, I do that once in a while, but I do have a Patreon, and you could go over there and throw a buck or two my way, and that would probably help out a whole lot. Oh yeah, number 9. Now this is a sort of a side question, but I get a lot of questions about where are you, and maybe we should meet up, and I have met different people from the knife community in person, and that's always something really fun. But I want to tell you this, guys, I'm really thinking seriously about organizing a get-together. There's a few Facebook groups that I would use. You know, Blade Forums, the Canadian side of Blade Forums, and it would be nice to do some kind of get-together for knife guys in the, you know, I wouldn't want it right in Toronto because the logistics would be a pain in the neck, but just outside of Toronto, Barrie, Orangeville, something like that, maybe even Newmarket. And so if you're into that, let me know. Either comment here or send me a message, or join the Sharp Stuff Facebook group so we can kind of keep track of each other, because that is something I would really like to try and do, especially for those of you who have repeatedly asked, hey, where are you? I think I'm near you, that kind of thing. Let's talk a little bit about cold steel. I've got a couple of cold steel folders here, and people have often asked me, why do you like those cold steel knives? Well, you know, they cut well. The lock is ridiculously strong. They're comfortable in hand. They're extremely strong, durable, capable knives. Okay, and so those are the reasons that I like them. Yes, they continually do this. Okay, see how that's not sharpened all the way to the very heel of the blade? That is a huge pain in the neck, and it really drives me crazy. But everything else about this knife is so good, okay, that I'm willing to forgive that, even though I definitely do not like it. All right, so let's go ahead and get to some of the other, we've got a few more questions here, and these are some of the ones I've gathered in the last little while. I'm gonna try to speed up. We're at 18 minutes. Let's try to be out of here in 25 minutes. I know that's long, but it's kind of the nature of this video. So, what about, and here's some questions I get, and I think I've heard some others talk about this. What can we switch out here? Let's pull this guy out of the way and throw this one in, and let's open the blades just to create some visual difference here as we go through the video. So, what are my thoughts on any number of higher end or medium end Chinese knife makers? And there are a bunch of them out there. There's Kevin John knives, there's CH knives, there's Rad knives, Tucson knives, and a bunch of others. You may find them on like AliExpress, and every once in a while you even find one on Blade HQ. I remember seeing some knives on Blade HQ not that long ago. I think the company started with a B, but they were pretty blatant copies of some other knives. Anyway, There are a number of these high-end companies out of China, and you have to remember, guys, that manufacturing in China is something that's fairly easy to do. And a lot of these companies, you know, if you go to We Knives, like Boost Blades did, they'll make you a great knife, okay? So there are a number of these companies out there, some reputable, some not so reputable, but getting a product machined in China is fairly easy and fairly inexpensive. So if you can source, you know, materials and stuff like that, and even if you can't, you know, you can have the company make it for you. That's pretty easy to do. Now the problem that creates is, you know, anybody can come up with anything, and the same company may be making all of these knives or none of them. All right, and so there are too many unknowns to really come down with a meaningful answer about a lot of these lesser known Chinese knives, the ones that really haven't quite gone mainstream yet. Okay, some other knives like Stedman, like Real Steel, like Riot, these companies are a little more of a known quantity and they're easier to comment on. But there are a ton of other Chinese makers that you might find on AliExpress or whatever, that there's just too many for me to keep up with them all, and you never really know what you're gonna get. Had a question about blade steel. So let's talk just a little bit about blade steel. The first one is to say this. So someone asked, what about recommending a bunch of M390 knives? That is, knives that are in M390. And M390 is a great steel, okay, absolutely wonderful. Here's what I think is the best way to approach this. Rather than me list off a bunch of knives that happen to be in M390, if you go to Blade HQ and you look at the drop-down menu at the side, you can specify, hey, I just want to see knives that are in M390. And I did that myself in testing for this video, and it was super fun. And now there's a whole bunch more knives that I really feel like I want to buy. Thanks a lot, whoever asked that question. And so I think that's the best way to do it. Now, I had another question about S110V versus M390. And so here's what I want to say, guys. I want to talk about steel for just a second. And I kind of gonna break knives down into a few different steel types. So let's use our knives on the table to make some points. So the bottom level, okay, I would call budget steel. So HCR13 MOV, 440C, 420HC, 9CR13 MOV, OS8, a bunch of others that we could name. They're in the budget steel category. Now, below the budget steel category are like the stainless steel or surgical steel. Okay, those don't even really deserve consideration, but there are those budget steels, and they're gonna perform in a similar manner. Then there's like a step up from that to middle grade steels, okay? And so, you know, maybe you talk about 154CM or VG10 or 14C28N or D2, you know, a bunch of those kinds of steels that are pretty good performance, better certainly than your average budget steel, but not quite amazing yet. And then we could move up even another step to S30V, S35VN. I'm not gonna, you know, S35VN is sort of a super steel, but not exactly. And there are a number of other steels here. And then there are super steels who have, you know, outstanding properties. Sometimes they pursue one property above others, okay? But once you get into super steels, you know, now you're talking about S90V, 189ZDP, CTS 204P. But I guess with the S30V, I would put CTS XHP. But yeah, you get up to, you know, 204P and 20CV and M390, and you know, there are a number of sort of, so let's add one more knife to the top so I can sort of give you my 4 designations. And the reality is, unless you are like into materials testing or able to, you know, maybe you're Cedric Anita outdoors where he's doing these long detailed tests, for your average use, you're gonna just know super steel, high-end steel, good steel, and budget steel, okay? And you're gonna kind of have expectations based on those categories. Now, yes, this discussion could be much, much, much more nuanced, okay? And I know that, but in this video, it's just not gonna happen. Okay, quickly, diminishing returns in knife purchases. Yes, All of these knives are way past the point of diminishing returns. This guy is probably about where most people want to go. If you just want to sort of, how much do I have to spend to get a really good knife? Around between $100 and $150, okay? Sometimes you'll get a knife that's much lower than that, or that's a little lower than that, that's still really good. You might get one a little higher than that, is at offering some extra piece. But for $100 to $150, you're gonna get a great knife, as long as you avoid some of the failures that are out there. And if you're watching this video, you're probably aware of what some of those are. Next, had a question about Hinderer prices increasing and CRKT prices increasing. Now, I knew that the Hinderers had gone up just a little bit. I think the average XM18 these days is like 445 or 449 or something like that. That's the 3.5 inch. Okay, the 3 inch is 425, which used to be the price for these. And there was even a time when I think they were 375. So yeah, the prices have gone up a bit, and I'm sure there's some inflation happening there. Questionable, guys. I think that's a tough thing to justify, because the trend in the knife industry right now is not toward higher end knives, it's toward lower end knives. And the custom market is pretty soft, the mid-tech market is pretty soft. People are not wanting to spend these large amounts of money on knives. So it's probably a dangerous thing. A company like where they're making really good stuff and they were selling them for like $295, they've come down to $250, even $240. And I think that's where people are willing to be. It's going to be a little harder to get them to step up to that Hinderer. Chris Reeve, now maybe this is just a news item that they're going to change. I wasn't able to find that, but they were still the same price as they've been for quite a long time at $410 for your standard large Sebenza. The Inkosi Insingo, which the large size, which I do really want to check out, they're 425, I think, or 445. Anyway, they're a little more expensive, but not a whole lot more expensive. Now, I did want to speak to one other thing, and that is someone asked about, Chris Reeve innovating in some way, adding bearings or a flipper or something else like that. And I don't know about that, guys. I think, Chris Reeve knives are kind of like Jeeps, okay? And that is, in order for it to be a Jeep, you sort of expect certain things. And if they go too far, a Jeep Liberty, a Jeep Liberty, I don't know if I call that a Jeep anymore, right? And so I think Chris Reeve has to be really careful that they don't go to a point where they're no longer Chris Reeve, all right? Obviously, I know Chris Reeve is gone, so maybe they should just change the name altogether and call themselves something else. Let's see, so I've got those covered. Yes, autos are still banned in Canada. That was a question. I hope that changes, right? This is one of those things. Same with gun laws, knife laws. Technology changes and makes the world, evolve around it. And sometimes our laws don't reflect those changes very well. And I think the knife community is one of those areas where laws written in the early 1900s are still in place, and they're trying to apply them to modern tactical or modern everyday carry folders, and it just doesn't work very well. A note on Boker. Boker's using 440C. Is that appropriate for the price point? Not really. I think Boker should change away from 440C and use something else. It'd be great to see them use S35VN or S30V or even 154CM. But what I will say is their 440C tends to be pretty well done. All right, we are at half an hour, guys. I want to thank you so much for watching. I want to thank all of you who contribute to the channel, and I want to thank all of you who subscribe. I'm going to do a video where I talk more about some of this stuff, but there are so many of you who support me and help the channel grow and just have lots to say and contribute, comment on every video and watch every video from beginning to end, and I really, really appreciate that. Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be at 5,000 subscribers. This is something that I really, didn't anticipate, and now I can actually start to say, hey, let's look for 10,000, and that's pretty cool. So thanks a lot. Thanks again for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will talk to you soon.